If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedman.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is Jon Schumacher. Jon specializes in webinars and online events that convert. He primarily works with coaches and consultants and course sellers, helping them craft their best sales message to sell more of their programs and courses. He's worked with over 300 clients across 30 plus industries, and more than 1,000 students have gone through his training programs. He's the host of the world's largest online sales webinar conference, the Webinar Mastery Summit, which has had more than 13,000 attendees worldwide. Jon is one of my all-time favorite coaches. Jon, what an absolute privilege it is to welcome you to the show. So thank you for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
Thank you, Susan. I'm excited to be here and appreciate all of what you do and excited to chat today and hopefully share some good value with everybody.
I'm sure you will. That's just who you are, Jon. I know. You're one of the go-to people when it comes to helping coaches and consultants use webinars and online events to get more clients. And as you know, you and I were talking about the fact that this podcast is all about helping nonfiction authors market their book and themselves as authors more effectively. Knowing that and knowing obviously your subject matter so well, where do you see webinars fitting into an author's marketing strategy?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. Let's give some context first before we dive into maybe some more specifics. But most, nonfiction authors, they have other things to sell. Sure, they can sell books, but as you know, a book is often more of a big business card, so to speak, for possibly consulting services, coaching services, other programs or services that individual is selling. And that's where webinars can come in great, right? You can invite your book buyers, your leads lists to a webinar, and then build some trust, expose them to the new opportunity, which is working with you, and then make a call to action to do that, right? And so webinars often fit very, very well if you are selling anything, let's say beyond the book, consulting, courses, coaching, services. You can use your webinars to sell something directly or to generate leads or sales conversations with yourself afterwards. They would be a good fit for a lot of folks listening to this because I know a lot of folks are not just selling books, right? They're selling other things at higher price points. And that's where a webinar could fit perfectly.
Yes, you're absolutely right, because many of the authors are already consultants or coaches, speakers. Yes, the book is a great door opener. It exposes their expertise in a certain subject matter or an topic and industry. I mean, that's always the best, and especially in a niche market. I'm never assuming that our listeners have done, let's say, some webinars, but they've heard about them, but they don't know where to even or how to go about starting to do one. What would your recommendations be?
I would start with the end in mind. A lot of people kind of start at the front of this and go, okay, well, what's a topic I could teach on or that kind of thing? The first question is really like, what are you focused in the context of a sales webinar? Let's say you're a consultant and you want to generate more leads for your consulting practice. Okay, so what is the offer that we want people to take us up on? What is the thing we're focused on selling? Because we want to start with that because then we need to back ourselves up into like, okay, what material do I need to share? What does that person need to understand and believe in order to want to talk to me about my consulting services? And so it starts with, in the context of creating a sales or a lead generation type webinar, what is the end goal here, right? Where do we want to take people? What are the objections, concerns, mind blocks? What do they need to believe to want to take you up on your service, right? And so we don't want to just start with, oh, well, I'll teach them this one random thing that I think would be valuable, and then try to stuff your offer on the end of that process. That usually gets less than great results. And so it starts with like, what do you want to sell? And then really listing out like, what do they need to know, understand, and believe about themselves, about you, and about the opportunity that you're presenting so they want to engage you on your thing. And that's sort of the planning starting point for it.
I know that the model, or one of the models that you use, is to offer a free webinar that leads to another program, some other purchase. There's a reluctancy sometimes to give something away for free. There's so many webinars out there that are free. Talk to us about whether we should ask for payment or whether we should be doing it for free. Where does the free come in, and what's the advantage of that?
Yeah, for most people, I'm going to recommend you do a free webinar, not a paid webinar. Now, there are cases where paid webinars, paid workshops make sense. Like if you have a large email database or a large following and you can sell a large number of tickets to a webinar or workshop, then it might make sense. If you don't have a big audience, though, which is probably a lot of folks listening, then, if you charge, let's say $37 or $50 or whatever for a webinar, you might only end up with a few people on that webinar. You're just not going to be able to sell enough volume, because the purpose of a paid webinar is not just to make the whatever amount of money you get for the webinar. It's to curate a group of buyers that then buy the next thing in your sequence of offers. And if you can only get 2, 3, 4, 5 sales of your webinar, yeah, you might get a client maybe, but you're just not going to get a lot of volume on that presentation. And so you're putting up a barrier for those people to experience you. For most people, I recommend a free webinar because you'll get more people there and you'll allow people to experience you, to gather trust to you without putting up a wall or a barrier. There's cases where it makes sense, but for most people, including myself, I don't do paid webinars. I've done paid workshops in the past. I have a fairly good size audience. I might get 25, 30, 40 people there, which is not bad, and get a few clients out of it. But I get a lot more business and a lot more clients by offering the free thing. So I recommend for most people, they do the free webinar to, again, lower the barrier to entry, generate more demand for what they're doing, and build more trust with the people in their audience.
One of the things, and I know you and I've talked a little bit about this, is that I'm a high content presenter. And for me to do a free webinar, it's like, how much content would be right for me to offer in that time without sort of giving the farm away and everything in the farm?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a common question, but it's not necessarily how much content, but what type of content that makes the bigger difference. Let's say it's a live presentation. So let's say you fire up your Zoom account, you invite your LinkedIn or your email network to that webinar, and you're planning on giving let's say a 60-minute overall discussion, 60 minutes with maybe some questions and answers. And a lot of people say, well, how much should I give away, or what should I talk about, and those kind of things. It's not how much content, but it's what type of content. Again, it needs to be centered around what they need to know, understand, and believe in order to want to buy from you. And you can delight your audience without spraying them in the face with a bunch of nice to know information. In fact, the biggest mistake people will make with putting together a sales webinar or a lead webinar is they'll just turn on the fire hose and they'll spray people in the face with a bunch of nice to know information that they might share with a client that doesn't really lead that attendee anywhere. It doesn't lead them to a new opportunity. It doesn't lead them to a decision point. People usually leave in one of two mindsets. They either leave with more questions than they had when they came, not so good, or they clap their hands, they give you a 5-star review and they say, awesome webinar, you're great. Let me go try that myself and I'll quote unquote come back to you. and they never do. It's really not about how much content. In fact, you'd rather have less content than more. In fact, your presentation should be 80% context, why something's important, why they should be interested in this, and concepts, which are high-level ideas, and maybe 20% content, which is reinforcing the other two. So I'm happy to go deeper on that if you'd like, if people are interested in that. But it's a common mistake. Like people try to jam all this random content into a presentation. What might be good for us to talk about is maybe what to do instead. Right, Susan?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm guilty as charged with that one. I mean, I've done, this is great information. You need to know this. And mine tends to be the opposite. It tends to be more of the 80% content and maybe the 20% context. So, yes, let's talk more about that because now that you've brought it up, we don't want to leave that loop open. So let's go down that road.
Yeah. If the thing we should be careful doing is over teaching a bunch of how-to content that we might just share with a client. Instead, what we want to focus on are a few key things. And we don't have time to go through everything, but let me just give you a few of the most important elements of a good sales presentation. The first one is, let's just say they're on the webinar. What are you teaching, right? The first one is what I like to call a new opportunity. Are you positioning or presenting a new opportunity for them? Are you presenting a better, newer, unique path forward for your potential buyer? They're stuck with their problems. They're trying to solve them. They've tried a bunch of other methods. Are you positioning what you're teaching or sharing on that webinar as a new opportunity for them? There's lots of examples we could talk about. One of mine was like how to use AI for webinars, or I had a client in the healthcare space that discovered this route that helped people lose weight. Maybe you're saying, well, that's not me. I don't have any new discoveries. The new opportunity then for most of you listening is the unique way that you get your clients results, right? And so you should have that mapped out. I call it a roadmap to results. Should be a series of steps, phases, elements that is unique to how you get your clients results. And we want to position that framework, that roadmap as a new opportunity. So the first thing we need to do is we need to think through the lens of like, am I presenting this as a new opportunity? Or is this just kind of blah, something they've already heard of or tried or whatever? And sometimes you have something truly unique. Sometimes you have to manufacture that in the form of how you get your clients results. Does that make sense, Susan?
It certainly does. It's because, yes, that looking at it differently. And then this is what the book primarily usually is about, is something unique, so a different approach to solving a problem, be it, let's say, stress management or having an autistic child and how to work with that child. So it's that uniqueness that they've already written about in the book that would that be something that they would bring to the forefront then in a webinar?
Yeah, that would be like the first part of the webinar would be building up the big idea around that new opportunity. If you're listening to this, you've written a book, you're an expert on that topic in all likelihood, right? We need to kind of build up that new opportunity, a new discovery, a new way of doing something that ideally is unique. As the saying goes, it's often better to be different than better in the eyes of the consumer, the eyes of the potential buyer. It's like, well, I haven't tried that. That sounds intriguing. That sounds interesting. I can see how that might help me. That's the kind of what we want to build up. What we don't want to do is just start our webinar and start teaching step by step a bunch of random stuff on like very granular how to do something. Again, people might like you, but it's not going to give them a reason to hire you, right? Or to work with you. And so there needs to be a bit of a gap there between where they are and the new opportunity that you're presenting. That's kind of one of the key elements at a high level. Every time I'm looking at a webinar, I'm auditing one today as we speak, actually, for a client. I'm looking at it through that lens. Like, what's the new opportunity they're truly presenting here? You've shown them the new opportunity. Now the next question would be like, okay, well, how does that work? Or what's involved? And again, we're not going to teach them everything on this presentation. It would be doing them a disservice to do that. But what we do want to do is show them high-level concepts of how to get there, right? You've shown them this new opportunity. Okay, how does it work to get there? What's the high-level ideas? And I'll usually break that into 3 steps or 3 elements. People will often fight me on this. Most of you can get what you do at a high level down to 3 elements. It's a lot more consumable to the human brain in 3s versus 5s or 7s or 6s or whatever, how many steps you have in your framework or your coaching or consulting process. So we want to break that down for them. How does this look at a high level? But we want to do it in a way, ideally, and this is where the art comes in a little bit of doing this, as what I call a wow demonstration. Like all good presentations have that wow demonstration factor. And it could be, again, if you sell something visual, it could be you visually walking people through a piece of your software or something you do on the screen. It could be you telling an incredible story or delivering a case study that really wows them. It's really about like, how can you ramp up that wow factor a little bit as you're presenting the how, right? Like as you're presenting what the new opportunity, which is your process or your discovery, looks like. How can you wow them? So like for me, I have a software on AI. I'll actually just strategically screen share how the software can build content in front of them literally in like less than 10 seconds. And people go, wow, okay. Like that's interesting. I want that thing. It's a little different for you depending on what you're selling and what you're presenting. But the big takeaway here is just kind of look at your presentation through the lens of like, how can I increase the wow factor a little bit so that people are emotionally excited to want that opportunity? So hopefully that makes sense.
It certainly does. We've got the 2 so far, the uniqueness, the new opportunity, and then presenting it as 3 different components. And I wanted to talk about those because I'm pleased that you touched on that, because I know, having attended several of your free webinars, that you do so brilliantly look at 1, 2, and 3 different opportunities.
Yeah, I know this can be a struggle for some people. They need a lot of help coming up with these. I'm pretty good at like boiling things down that way because I've just been doing it for so long. But yeah, ideally it's 3 things. You'd rather teach less steps or less elements, even if it doesn't include everything. You don't need to teach them everything or show them everything. They just need to see enough of what it looks like to understand and feel like they've had that, well, how does it work, itch scratched. Again, you're not teaching them everything. In fact, going beyond what's necessary to get them to understand that opportunity risks confusing them, risks having them have more questions come up in their brains if you do it that way.
So I want to switch this just a little, because I know, again, having worked with you, that when it comes to looking, you've presented your 3 different pieces of content. Then it comes to now looking at presenting the offer.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's very big with you is that the bonuses that you present with the offer often are what sparks the sale rather than the actual offer itself. Can you address that, why that is?
Yeah, so there's really 2 main types of offers for a webinar. One is a call to action to book a call or a conversation with you or your team. The other one I call direct selling is just making a direct offer. Hey, here's the page, go buy the thing. But regardless of which call to action you want to make, if you're a consulting firm or a service-based company, maybe it's just to book a call with your team. If you're a coach or something or selling a course, then it might be direct sale. Regardless, though, you want to think about like, how can you make the call to action or the offering more valuable? How can you make it have a higher perceived value so more people take it? And again, if you're booking calls for your firm, the initial offering is that call with you, right? We want to position that call as a valuable complementary service in and of itself. And part of that is how we describe the call and all that the beneficial things they'll get on that conversation or that call. But also it can be highlighting other elements or bonuses around the call. So for example, I was working with an SEO company. They're called the SEO Growth Audit. And we said, during the call, we're going to give you a free report of all your website's current inefficiencies. We're going to give you a list of your competitors' keywords so you know what traffic sources you could be tapping into. And we're going to give you a full recommendations report, whether you decide to work with our firm or not. Which call would you rather take? Just a no obligation call or an SEO growth audit with all of those kind of things, right? And so we ramped up the desirability of that call with them, and that increased their take rate. You can do the same thing if you're selling something directly. Like you want to strategically think about offering a series of bonuses and things like that. And to your point, they often are more important than the core offer that you're selling. Your bonuses and things like that should be strategically created or positioned. They should be created or positioned to solve problems, perceived problems, objections, mental blocks, all the reasons why they think they can't get the result that your program offers. So we can go down a deep rabbit hole on bonuses, but yeah, that's just kind of a high level. So takeaway here, don't just slap your offer up there, whether it's a call or whether it's a program directly, and talk all about the features and blah, 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 blah. You want to actually strategically position bonuses that give value and solve problems that make your offer more valuable and perceived that way.
So it complements what your core offer, as you said, is. So there's a lot of thought, because I know putting together bonuses for webinar that I'm looking to do next year it takes a lot of thought just to decide what would be valuable enough that people were like, oh, I've got to have that.
Yeah. And it'll evolve, Susan. Well, I've done the same AI webinar now. This will be going into next year. This will be the third or fourth time. I've changed my bonuses here and there. Some of them are the same because it works. I always maybe add or look at a bonus, or like I'm adding an offer bonus next time because I know that's an objection for people. Like, well, I would do a webinar, but I don't have my offer ready yet. So I don't want to put the cart before the horse, because people will give you feedback like on why they're not buying, right? You think through that and go, okay, what do I need to have in place to help them solve that problem or not feel that way?
So it's listening to your audience as well. That's a really good point. If they're not buying, why is it that they're not buying? Because you haven't given them enough information that they can do it on their own. Because often, as you said earlier, we're talking about the fact that if I give so much away, it's like, well, I don't really need to buy anything because you've already told me how to do this.
Right. A good question to ask is always like, for the people that buy from you, why did you buy from me? And then for the people that didn't, why didn't you? I mean, that's pretty simple. You can do that through interviews. Like all your buyers, you can reach out to them, especially in the beginning. Why did you decide to buy from me? Or like if you have a subscription product, like I know we have a gentleman who has a software product in our group. I told him, like, survey your customers, find out like, why did they buy? Why did they continue to pay you? That way, you know what to double down on in your marketing messages, your webinars, whatever, sales pages, websites, whatever, right? Like we need to know why people buy and why they don't buy. And if we can figure that out, we'll do a lot better. And so it's important to do.
Yeah, the $64,000 question. That's easy. We'll solve it. No problem.
Right.
Jon, I know that our listeners are probably chomping at the bit saying, how do we get hold of this person? How do we find out more? So take it away. Tell us what would be the best way for our listeners to get hold of you. And I believe you have a little gift for them. So what is your bonus now to getting in touch and working with you?
Sure. I do have a guide that I've put together that should be linked, I think, on this page or somewhere around this interview. That is 27 webinar conversion points that will help you book more leads on your calendar. Everything from like when to host, how to remind people, how to get people there, how to follow up, some of those tips. It's a short read, but you can just download it and reference it for any time you plan on doing a webinar, or if you're doing webinars. It's going to help you optimize your campaign so that you get more leads, more calls booked, more conversations from each campaign that you host. And so it's called, 27 webinar conversion points to book your calendar with more leads. And I think that should be linked somewhere around this page. if you're on the show notes page or whatever. That's, Susan's thing. If you want to reach out to me, you can just simply Google my name or just Google webinar consultant. If you Google webinar consultant, I rank number 1, I believe, as of this recording on Google for that. So you can just simply find my website, just go type in webinar consultant, find my website. There's plenty of information there. Or you can Google my name as well, but people misspell that usually. It's Jon, Jon, and Schumacher is Schumacher, like the race car driver, although no relation to my knowledge. Anyway, that's how you get a hold of me.
That's great. And yes, you're right. We'll put everything in the show notes. I'll put a link to that conversion guide, and then people can get in touch with you. And listeners, go back and listen to how Jon presented that gift that he offered, because that was perfect, because he gave it so much value, which, yes, it does have, but the way he positioned it, it was brilliant. So again, picking up on the way you structured that is something that listeners, you can learn from. Jon, we always end off our episode with our guest giving a golden nugget. So what would you like to leave our listeners with?
There's a lot I could share here, but I think the biggest thing, if you want to grow yourself, your business, all those kind of things, you need to increase your visibility, right? And you need to build more trust with more people and make more offers. And if you'll do that, you'll grow. I had a mentor tell me, Jon, if you want to double your business, double the number of offers you make. And so what's the element of an offer? Well, there's something to sell and there's a person to sell it to, right? And so what's required to make that work? Well, getting in front of more of the right people is one of them. And webinars can help you do that. You don't need expensive technology. You can just use even like a Zoom meeting account to start with. I've had a number of clients start getting clients themselves just using Zoom, and maybe they have 6, 7, 8, 9 people on there the first time, but they were able to land clients and they've started growing from there. So the key is like, do more of what works. You need to get more visibility, and webinars can help you do that. The most successful people that I'm around, they're really good at compressing time, meaning they can do what most people do in 6 months and 6 weeks. And part of that comes down, which we didn't talk about today, to having a plan, to having some systems. And once you create your webinar, you get some simple systems in place, keep it simple. You can really start to systematically get more visible, build more trust, get more leads, and make more offers. And so I'll just, somewhere in there is something good. Hopefully that'll be a good point to end on. And thanks for having me, Susan. I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, there's so many beautiful things that you'd be able to come back and hopefully be willing to talk to us about that. Your plans, your systems, the bonuses. I mean, we could go down many different avenues with this, but really appreciate you sharing all this great wisdom. And listeners, again, as I said, go back and listen to this several times, because there are so many golden nuggets in everything that Jon has shared with us today. And by the way, you know the drill. If your book isn't selling the way you wanted or expected to, let's you and I jump on a quick call together to brainstorm ways to ramp up those sales, because you've invested a whole lot of time, energy, and money, and it's time you got the return you were hoping for. So go to brainstormwithsusan.com to schedule your free call. And in the meantime, I hope this powerful interview sparks some ideas you can use to sell more books. Until next week, here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.